too scary story about vacationing in terror, a tale of horror on a desolate island. Story 1. The Island of Cursed Souls, a summer vacation turned nightmare. Amanda had always been fascinated by the island, with its tales of buried treasure and ancient curses, so when she won a free vacation there, she couldn't wait to explore the island's secrets. But from the moment she arrived, Amanda knew that something was wrong. The island was shrouded in an eerie mist, and the trees seemed to whisper ancient secrets to anyone who would listen. Amanda shrugged it off, thinking that it was just the island's atmosphere. But then she started to hear strange noises at night, footsteps outside her door, the sound of whispers in her ear. She tried to dismiss it as just her imagination, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger. And then one night, she saw it, a figure in the mist, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. It was a ghost, she realized, and it was haunting her. Amanda tried to leave the island, but every boat she tried to board would break apart before she could set sail. She was trapped on the island, with the ghostly figure closing in on her every day. As the days passed, Amanda became weaker and weaker, her mind clouded by the ghost's influence. She could feel it whispering in her ear, urging her to join it in the afterlife. And then one night, the ghost appeared in her room, its cold fingers reaching out to touch her face. Amanda screamed, but it was too late. The ghost had claimed her, and she was doomed to spend eternity on the cursed island. As Amanda realized she was trapped on the cursed island, her fear and desperation only intensified. She could feel the ghostly presence growing stronger with each passing day, as if it was drawing power from her fear. Amanda began to see visions of the island's dark past, of the people who had been cursed and trapped on the island for centuries. She saw their anguished faces, heard their screams, and felt their pain. She tried to fight back against the curse, but it was too powerful. Her every move was thwarted, and she could feel the ghostly presence growing stronger within her. Amanda began to hear whispers in her ear, urging her to do terrible things. She tried to resist, but the voices were too strong. She began to feel a dark force taking over her mind and body. One night, Amanda woke up to find herself standing at the edge of a cliff, her body shaking with fear. The voice in her head was urging her to jump, to end her life and join the cursed souls on the island. Amanda screamed and fought against the force, but it was too strong. She felt herself being pushed closer and closer to the edge, her mind consumed by terror. And then, in a moment of clarity, Amanda remembered a talisman she had been given before her trip. She fumbled in her pocket and pulled it out, holding it up to the ghostly presence. As she did, the air around her grew thick with a cold, oppressive energy. The ghostly presence screamed in rage and anguish, its power broken by the talisman's holy power. Amanda collapsed to the ground, her body shaking with exhaustion. The curse had been lifted, but the memory of the ghostly presence would stay with her forever. As Amanda left the cursed island, she knew that she had escaped with her life, but she also knew that she would never be the same. The terror and horror of the cursed island would stay with her always, haunting her dreams and shaping her nightmares. Amanda returned to her normal life, but the experience on the island of terror never left her. She tried to convince herself that it was just a nightmare, but the memories were too vivid and too real. She found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, expecting to see the ghostly presence lurking in the shadows. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, and she could feel the eyes of the cursed souls following her every move. Amanda's friends and family tried to console her, but they couldn't understand the terror she had experienced. They dismissed her stories as mere hallucinations, but Amanda knew the truth. She became increasingly reclusive, spending most of her time alone in her room. She couldn't bear to be around people, fearing that the ghostly presence would follow her. One night, Amanda woke up to the sound of scratching at her bedroom door. She sat up in bed, heart pounding in her chest. The scratching grew louder and more persistent, as if something was trying to claw its way through the door. Amanda hesitantly approached the door, her hand shaking as she reached for the doorknob. She slowly turned the handle, and the door creaked open to reveal a dark, empty hallway. She cautiously stepped into the hallway, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. The air was thick with a cold, oppressive energy, and Amanda could feel the presence of the cursed souls around her. Suddenly, she heard a blood-curdling scream from down the hallway. Amanda ran towards the sound, her heart pounding in her chest. As she turned the corner, she saw a ghostly figure hovering in the air, its eyes glowing with a demonic red light. The figure turned towards her, and Amanda felt a wave of terror wash over her. She tried to run, but her feet felt heavy as if she was running through thick mud. The ghostly figure floated closer and closer, its hands outstretched, ready to claim her as its own. Amanda closed her eyes, bracing herself for the worst, but suddenly the room was filled with a bright light. The ghostly figure screamed in agony, its power broken by the holy light. As the light faded, Amanda found herself back in her bedroom, safe and sound. She breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that she had been saved by a higher power. But the memory of the ghostly figure would stay with her forever. She knew that the cursed souls of the Island of Terror would never rest, and she feared that one day they would come back to claim her as their own. Amanda's experience on the Island of Terror had changed her forever. She knew that she would never be able to forget the horrors she had experienced, but she also knew that she had the strength to fight against them. She would always be vigilant, always on the lookout for the ghostly presence, and always ready to fight back against the forces of evil. Despite her best efforts, Amanda could never truly shake off the terror she had experienced on the Island of Terror. The memories of the cursed souls and the ghostly figure continued to haunt her, even in her waking moments. She tried to seek help from a therapist, but none of them believed her story. They dismissed her claims as delusions brought on by trauma, and prescribed her with a variety of medications that did little to help her. One day, while walking through the park, Amanda saw a figure in the distance. It was the same ghostly figure that had haunted her dreams for months, and it was slowly moving towards her. Amanda tried to run, but her feet felt heavy, as if she was wading through molasses. The figure grew closer and closer, its demonic eyes locking onto hers. Suddenly, Amanda felt a sharp pain in her head, as if someone had plunged a knife into her skull. She stumbled to the ground, writhing in agony as the figure loomed over her. As she lay there, helpless and in pain, Amanda heard a voice whispering in her ear. It was a voice from beyond the grave, the voice of one of the cursed souls of the Island of Terror. The voice promised Amanda that it would take away her pain, that it would make her forget everything that had happened. All she had to do was let go, to surrender to the darkness and embrace the curse. Amanda felt a part of her breaking, as if the very fabric of her being was tearing apart. She could feel the darkness closing in around her, threatening to swallow her whole. But then, she remembered the priest's words. She remembered the power of the holy light, and she reached deep inside herself, finding a strength she never knew she had. With all her might, Amanda forced herself up, her body straining against the weight of the curse. She closed her eyes, focusing all her energy on the memory of the holy light. Suddenly, a blinding white light burst forth from her body, illuminating the entire park. The ghostly figure shrieked in pain, its power broken by the holy light. When Amanda opened her eyes again, the figure was gone, and the park was bathed in the soft light of the setting sun. She breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that she had been saved once again. From that day on, Amanda knew that the curse would never truly leave her. She would always carry a part of it with her, but she also knew that she had the power to fight back against it. She continued to see the ghostly figure in her dreams, and she still felt the presence of the cursed souls around her, but she no longer feared them, knowing that the power of the holy light was on her side. Amanda's experience on the Island of Terror had taught her a valuable lesson. She knew that evil was real, and that it could take many forms, but she also knew that she had the strength to fight against it, and that she would never give up the fight. Story 2: Summer Camp Massacre, The Ghost of the Killer. The summer camp was supposed to be a fun-filled adventure for the group of young campers. They arrived at the rustic campsite, eager to make new friends and explore the great outdoors. But something was off about the campsite. As the days went on, strange things began to happen. Campers would wake up to find their belongings had been moved, or their tents had been slashed open. The counselors brushed it off as pranks, but the campers could feel a growing sense of unease. One night, the campers were awakened by blood-curdling screams. They rushed outside to find that the counselors had been brutally murdered in their sleep. Panic set in as the campers realized they were alone, with no way to contact the outside world. As the days went on, the campers tried to survive, banding together to fend off the unknown assailant. But one by one, they fell, their bodies found in gruesome and horrifying states. The last camper alive, a young girl named Emily, was the only one to discover the truth. The campsite was built on an ancient burial ground, and the spirits of the dead had been awakened by the campers' presence. In a fit of rage, they had taken revenge on the living. Emily managed to escape the campsite, running through the woods until she was found by a passing car. But the horrors she had witnessed would haunt her for the rest of her life, and the summer camp massacre would go down in history as one of the most terrifying events of all time. The news of the summer camp massacre spread like wildfire, shocking the nation and sparking a manhunt for the killer. But despite their best efforts, the police were unable to track down the murderer. The survivor, Emily, was placed in a witness protection program and moved to a new town, where she tried to start a new life. But the trauma of the summer camp massacre never left her, and she struggled with nightmares and flashbacks. Years later, she received a letter in the mail. It was from an unknown sender, but she recognized the handwriting. It was the same handwriting that had been scrawled on the walls of the campsite, taunting the campers and warning them of their impending doom. The letter was brief, but it was enough to send chills down Emily's spine. It read, "I'm still here, watching, waiting, and when the time is right, I'll come for you." Emily knew that the killer was still out there, and she knew that she would never be safe. She contacted the police, but they were unable to trace the letter's origin, and they could not provide her with any protection. In a desperate attempt to take control of her life, Emily decided to confront her fears head-on. She went back to the site of the summer camp massacre, armed with nothing but a flashlight and a can of pepper spray. The campsite was still abandoned, the buildings crumbling and the woods overgrown. But as Emily made her way through the deserted site, she could feel a presence watching her, following her. And then, out of the darkness, a figure appeared. It was the killer, his face hidden behind a mask, his eyes glowing with a malevolent energy. Emily raised her can of pepper spray, but she knew it was useless. The killer advanced on her, his hand reaching for her throat. Emily closed her eyes, ready to meet her fate. But then she heard a gunshot. The killer fell to the ground, a bullet hole in his chest. Emily had thought that going back to the site of the summer camp massacre would help her confront her fears. But as she made her way through the deserted campsite, she felt a growing sense of dread in the pit of her stomach. She knew that the killer was still out there, and that he was watching her, waiting for the right moment to strike. As she walked through the abandoned cabins, she heard strange noises coming from the woods. She couldn't tell if they were animal sounds or something more sinister. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to calm her nerves and stay focused. But then she heard footsteps behind her. She spun around, her pepper spray at the ready, but there was no one there. The footsteps continued, growing louder and closer, until they seemed to be right behind her. Emily whirled around again, only to come face to face with the killer. He was wearing a mask that obscured his features, but his eyes were glowing with an otherworldly energy. Emily raised her pepper spray, but the killer moved too quickly, grabbing her wrist and wrenching the can from her hand. He threw her to the ground, his boot pressing down on her chest, making it hard for her to breathe. Emily struggled to break free, but the killer was too strong. He leaned down, his face inches from hers, and whispered, "I've been waiting for this moment for a long time." Emily closed her eyes, bracing herself for the worst. But then she heard a gunshot. The killer's body jerked, and he fell to the ground, a bullet hole in his chest. The police had finally arrived, but it was too late. Emily was the only survivor of the summer camp massacre, and she had been pushed to the brink of madness by the killer's taunts and threats. Even though he was dead, she knew that he would haunt her for the rest of her life. In the years that followed, Emily struggled with PTSD and nightmares. She was haunted by the memories of the summer camp massacre and the killer who had stalked her. She never went camping again, and she never spoke of the incident to anyone. But one night, as she was lying in bed, she heard a familiar sound. It was the sound of footsteps, moving slowly and deliberately through her house. She sat up, her heart racing, and listened as the footsteps grew closer and closer. And then she heard a voice, whispering her name. Emily knew that the killer had returned, and that she was trapped in her own home with him. She tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She was paralyzed with fear. And then the killer appeared, his eyes glowing with an unearthly light. He smiled, his teeth gleaming in the darkness, and said, "I told you I'd come back for you." Emily tried to scream, but no sound came out of her mouth. She was frozen in terror, unable to move or even breathe. The killer moved closer, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the house. He raised his knife, ready to strike, and Emily knew that this time there was no escape. But then she remembered something. She had taken a self-defense class after the summer camp massacre, and she knew that she had to fight back. She summoned all her strength and kicked the killer in the stomach, sending him flying across the room. Emily ran for the door, but it was locked. She turned to face the killer, her heart pounding in her chest. He was standing up now, his eyes blazing with rage. Emily knew that she had to find a weapon, and fast. She looked around the room, her eyes scanning for anything that could be used as a weapon, and then she saw it, a lamp, lying on the table. She grabbed it, the cord trailing behind her, and swung it at the killer with all her might. The lamp shattered on impact, but the killer was still standing. Emily backed away, her mind racing. She needed a plan, a way to get out of the house and call for help. And then she remembered something else. She had a cell phone in her pocket, with the emergency number pre-programmed. She fumbled for it, her fingers shaking, and dialed the number. The operator answered, and Emily whispered, "Please, help me. There's someone in my house, trying to kill me." The operator assured her that help was on the way, and Emily felt a glimmer of hope. She ran for the door again, but this time, it opened. She burst outside, the cool night air washing over her. And then she saw the killer, standing in the yard. He had followed her outside, and he was closing in for the kill. Emily backed away, her eyes wide with fear. But then she heard the sound of police sirens, and the killer turned to face them. Emily took advantage of the distraction and ran for her life. She didn't stop until she was several blocks away, surrounded by police officers and flashing lights. They took her statement, and Emily felt a sense of relief wash over her. The killer had been caught, and she was finally safe. But then she heard a voice, whispering in her ear. It was the killer's voice, taunting her once again. Emily spun around, but there was no one there. And then she realized the killer was still inside her head, and he would never leave. The trauma of the summer camp massacre had scarred her for life, and no amount of therapy or medication could ever heal her completely. Emily knew that she would always be haunted by the ghost of the killer, and that the horror of that summer night would never truly be over.